On behalf of the president of IPI, Terry Rode Larson, and all my colleagues at IPI, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this meeting, which is part of our long-standing series with special representatives of the Secretary General, giving us an opportunity to hear at firsthand from UN and other leaders in ongoing peacekeeping operations. And we're really very privileged today to have Mr. Nicholas Kay, the new Special Representative of the Secretary General for Somalia, and Ambassador Mahamet Salah Annadif, the Special Representative of the African Union Chairperson for Somalia, both of whom are currently based in Mogadishu, which is a huge step forward from earlier times. And one of the main benefits of these events is really to give all of us an opportunity to hear it firsthand from those who are in the field and to have them share their insights and understanding with the UN policy community. Ambassador Annadif will be speaking in French with the interpretation, as I have explained. Well, Somalia has been on the United Nations agenda almost continuously since the fall of Siad Barre's government in January 1991. In January 2016, which is less than 2.5 years from now, it will be a quarter century since the Somali state collapsed. I want you all to try to take that in. Had we held this meeting 6 years ago, the situation would have looked very dark, with the capital, Mogadishu, virtually under al-Shabaab control, and much of the country, especially in the south, afflicted by conflict and famine. Well, today the situation is improved. After many unsuccessful efforts by the UN and the African Union to restore a central government and end endemic violence in the capital and the south, it was only in 2007, with the rise of al-Shabaab and the start of maritime piracy, that the UN and the African Union committed themselves to dealing with these threats by establishing and supporting AMISOM, the African Union mission in Somalia. AMISOM, against all odds, has been remarkably successful in driving al-Shabaab out of Mogadishu and much of the south. Anybody who goes back and reads the documents from 2007 will see all the skepticism, if not pessimism, about the prospects that AMISOM could achieve any of these goals. Very small. It was Uganda and Burundi troops. The UN didn't want to be there with troops. Very tough. Well, AMISOM has actually been successful, as I've just mentioned, to a large extent. And from 2011, 2 years ago, with the active engagement of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, your predecessor, Ambassador Augustine Mahiga, as well as the United Kingdom, the United States, and others, the United Nations and the African Union launched a new political process. The so-called transitional phase was officially brought to an end 1 year ago, last August, and the elections then brought in a new president, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, and a new parliament, providing a new opportunity to have a representative government with the potential to end clan divisions, divisive clan warfare, to create a new development strategy and begin a process of reconciliation. The challenges, however, persist. There's a statement you made either today or yesterday in the Council. The security situation in the South remains precarious. An inter-service press release 2 days ago said, after his first year as president of the world's most dangerous state, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud is still grappling with limited financial resources, corruption, a lack of service delivery, and the ongoing assassinations of government officials, including attempts on his own life. So we have right now an opportunity to hear directly from our two speakers on their assessment of how well the new Somali government and the international community are doing in responding to these challenges. So I've asked each of them to speak for 10 to 12 minutes, after which we will have a discussion. You get to ask some questions, not speeches. So we get as much of a chance for our speakers to share their insights with all of us. So again, let me first turn the floor over to the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Mr. Nicholas Kay.
Thanks very much indeed, John. And my goodness, thank you to everybody for turning up. Seems like there's a lot of interest in a free lunch on a Friday. So and in Somalia, obviously, as well. It's very encouraging. Right. Although this is supposed to be interactive, I will say a few words. And although John has said you should ask questions rather than make statements, I'm sure that's right. But I'm deeply conscious in the room there is a huge amount of expertise and knowledge on Somalia, which I don't possess. And so I'm sure some of that may well become obvious during the interaction, not least from John as well, who's given me a brief rundown of his own experience on the ground in Mogadishu in the 1980s and again in the 1990s. So I can't profess to have that kind of background at all. I'm 3 months into the job, and we've just been yesterday to the Security Council to present the first 90-day report on UNSOM's mission. What would be useful for you is probably not to repeat the hugely eloquent speech that I read out loud to the Security Council yesterday, which the weekend you can spend reading out loud yourself as you look at it on the internet. I'll try not to repeat all of that, but let me say that yesterday Ambassador Annadif and I briefed the Security Council together very deliberately because very foremost in our priorities is to try and ensure the closest possible working relationship between the African Union and the UN on the ground, and it was no accident that we briefed the Council together, and no accident that we are together on the stage today. Let me just do 4 things, if I can, as quickly as possible. One, just a quick burst on UNSOM, just in case you don't know what it is, and because it is new, it's probably worth just dwelling on it a little bit. The second one, I will answer the question which every SRSG is asked and most fears, especially on Somalia, which is, are you optimistic? And I'll answer that one for you. Thirdly, then, just talk a little bit about politics and a little bit about security, and then we'll wrap up. UNSOM, the easiest subject, the UN assistance mission in Somalia. One of the clues there is in the name and the preposition in. So we are, compared to other UN presences, very much in Somalia. We're based in Mogadishu. We have 3 people in the back office in Nairobi, and the other everybody else. I won't reveal a state secret as to how many we are yet, but we're building up. We're building up. About 40 or 50, I think, at the moment on the ground. But we're in Somalia, and we'll be present we are in Hargeisa and Garowe at the moment. We're also present now in Kismayo. We'll shortly be present in Baidoa and Beledweyne as well, we hope, before the end of the year. So this is a UN presence on the ground, out front, in Somalia, in a way that it hasn't been for a generation. The mission is briefly fourfold, really. First is to use political good offices to promote peace building and reconciliation. Pretty easily said, less easily done, but it's a classic political mission. The second is a building function, and we are the builders or the facilitators of building of state, institutions, capacity, particularly focused around the constitutional review process, which will work to build a new federal state and a new political disposition as to how that federalism will work, and the UN is mandated to support the federal government in that, and also particularly on institution security and rule of law institution building. So we're staffed up accordingly to support this building function, and that's relevant because it's a new phase in Somalia's history. As John said, the page has been turned from sort of dodgy transitional federal arrangements to a fully legitimate federal government installed in Mogadishu with united international support, and we're there to help to build. Thirdly, the mission focuses on human rights in a very big way. About a third of our mandate is monitoring and reporting, as well as capacity building on human rights. And then fourthly, we have a function for coordinating international assistance and donor coordination, and particularly through the process of the Busan Principles New Deal Compact. So that's what we do. And we've been doing it for 3 months. Are you optimistic? I told the Security Council yesterday, yes, resoundingly optimistic. And I think, that's a statement I stand by. Compared to where Somalia has been over the last 22 years, it is in a far, far better place. There is an awful lot of things going in the right direction in terms of the international support, and in terms of the politics of the country, and the legitimacy of the federal government, the availability of resources for immediate needs. I think, the building blocks are there enough to sort of engender some optimism. I then went on to tell the Council several things which were not particularly optimistic, because I think, although fundamentally optimistic about the long term, there are a series of very short-term risks which need to be flagged up and handled. On the politics, essentially, after a very slow first year, I would say the federal government of Somalia in the last couple of months and the federal institutions have engaged gear in a way which was lacking before, and significant progress has been made in terms of some of the key legislation passed by Parliament, to lay the foundations for the constitutional review process, and a national conference, Vision 2016, was launched by the President 2 weeks ago in Mogadishu, which starts this necessary, rather complex and long drawn-out process of revising the provisional federal constitution, leading to a final constitution submitted for referendum in 2015 and elections in 2016. Also, the resolution of the Juba issue, the agreement brokered by IGAD and Ethiopia in Addis 2 weeks ago, was a significant milestone as well in terms of political progress. And last but not least, the New Deal, which will be signed, not signed, endorsed in Brussels on Monday, is a significant achievement which brings together a Somali-led set of priorities determined by the federal government in consultation as broadly as possible, although the consultation will need to continue, and to which international partners are now pledging support. So that's all good. The slightly less good is the security, and this is really the issue which is of most immediate concern. And in Mogadishu, the last few months, security situation has degraded by any measures, any metrics, the numbers of grenade attacks, assassinations, complex attacks, IEDs, etc. This is classic asymmetric tactics now being used by Al-Shabaab. And, that is an impediment upon both politics progressing, governance progressing, and development being delivered by international partners. The UN is virtually alone now in terms of international presence on the ground. As we know, MSF have withdrawn. ICRC, usually a big appetite for these places, doesn't have any international staff in Mogadishu. So it's having an impact. How are we going to resolve the security issue? My conclusion is we're not going to resolve it in Mogadishu. We can improve some of the policing and some of the mitigation measures in Mogadishu, but we're not going to improve it unless and until Al-Shabaab are deprived of their key terrain, to use a military phrase. And a lot of their key terrain is strategic points such as ports and areas around them where they are able to have training camps, where they train suicide bombers, bomb makers, etc. And so that requires two things. It requires military effort and political effort. On the military effort, it requires more AMISOM. AMISOM does not have enough resources at the moment, particularly helicopters and mobility, probably not also enough troops. And secondly, it requires more Somali national security forces as well, and a more concerted effort from the international community to develop and enable Somali forces to deploy in the field. They don't have a logistic package at the moment which allows them to deploy. So it's quite simple. As I said to the Security Council yesterday, if we're going to ensure success and return upon the considerable investment to date, then we're just going to have to do a little bit more. And that was where we left the conversation with the Security Council, which I'm sure they're now ruminating on. So that's it. I am optimistic in the long term, but I am deeply conscious in the short term there are some significant risks, and it behoves us all to focus, not reduce our attention, and in fact increase our engagement. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Ambassador Annadif, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I must admit that since yesterday, as Mr. Ambassador Kay, we are subjected to the same exercise, and often we are asking ourselves, is it really useful to repeat ourselves? In any event, we're going to try to do our best to give rather interactive nature to our debate here today. And we're going to try to limit ourselves as much as possible so as to allow you to ask questions so that this debate is more fruitful. As Mr. Kay said, us too, at the level of the mission, we are optimistic that the things are starting to move forward over there. Because Somalia, well, everyone knows the genesis, the history of the country. It's been over 20 years now that there has been no states there. All the institutions had been wiped out, and each Somali found refuge, found a safe harbor in its clan, in its area. The mission is now there since 2007, but the African Union has started worked before that, but the Security Council approved this intervention, and now the mission, the mandate is constituted by 5 countries, mostly the 5 pioneers, that are the Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, Djibouti, and since April we also have on board Sierra Leone. Overall, the Security Council voted an effective of 17,731, which includes military personnel and police personnel. So we have 516 police with some units coming from Uganda and Nigeria, and we have also some higher up officers that are contributing to the training of the Somali police force, and they come from Ghana, from Sierra Leone, and from other African countries. And we also have a civilian component which supports a little bit the military work through small projects, so as to make sure that we win the hearts and minds of our brothers in Somalia once the situation is reestablished. We can be optimistic because we noticed, and at least since I'm there, I noticed that there's been a change in the mentalities over there. in the political class in Somalia. We have the feeling that in as much as they don't agree on many things, and that's quite natural, at the same time, no one wants war to restart. And I think that's something I've noticed very strongly. There's almost a consensus that, which means that no one wants to go backwards. Now, the second factor that allows us to be optimistic is that the state has started to rebuild itself. There is this constitutional issue between the central state and the various regions that are fighting with one another on how to fighting with the state on how to apply the constitution based on the agreement of August 28 that Ambassador Kay mentioned earlier. That gives us hope because the Jubla authorities have signed an interim agreement with the central government, but I'm convinced that all of the regions that were tempted to claim or to fight for independence are starting to moderate their claims now, and we are moving towards a harmonization between the federal government and the regional entities in terms of agreeing on the same vision, on the same definition of federalism. And I'm one of those who believe that federalism is an important step for Somalia. Because a country that has been without central state for about 20 years, it's almost like a child whom you're explaining how to walk, and you need to go in steps. And I think that the federal state and the other entities elect the various people to concentrate. That process is a positive step, and I will not teach you anything by telling you that unity is building up, and we need to reestablish this kind of lost trust, and we are starting to see a recovery in this area. That's why I'm optimistic. It's true that the other factor that tells us that we should be careful is that it's true that Al-Shabaab has been defeated on the military basis, they have adapted the tactic, the asymmetric tactic, which is based on the weaker force, and has created a lot of harm. They have suicide attacks. Yesterday there were still suicide attacks, and almost every day there's a suicide attack. They managed to build artisanal explosives that try to control by remote control using cell phones. They kill people that way. They manage to target assassinations. But it's the war of the weak. We're not minimizing them. We need to confront that challenge. We, at the level of our system, we are adapting to the new situation, but nevertheless, they also receive things from abroad and the international community, and also we must identify those sources that are helping them. Right now, they have some exits through some small harbors, and we are now conducting military operation to cut off those link with the outside world, but they are porous borders also, and therefore we need to be very watchful on that level. Now, the challenges on the security level are a reality, and we must confront them, and we are really now trying to limit them as much as possible. There are a number of political challenges and institutional challenges, and the government is doing a lot of work now to indeed face and confront this situation. But there are also challenges that are calling up the international community to act. I've taken the habit for a while now to say that if the international community doesn't mobilize, and if it did not mobilize, Somalia. You remember that 2 years ago, Mali was occupied by what we call jihadists, but actually it's a different name. Jihadists, Islamists, Al-Shabaab. It's the same ideology, it's the same theory, but there was such a mobilization that 2 years after the events, now you have elections in Mali now, and in the entire country of Mali. But in Somalia, it's been over 20 years that we are trying to get out of this situation. I think that there's an opportunity. Often we say the last steps are the most difficult ones, but I think the international community must mobilize today so that those last few steps that will allow Somalia to reach the level of Mali, be made, and so that at least by 2016, which is the constitutional step, that we manage to organize elections in all of Somalia. Rebuilding has started and must continue. And a number of logistical challenges that we are facing, that the national forces are meeting, we must find solutions to them, because without that, we won't be able to move forward and to reach our objectives. And it doesn't necessarily need much, because right now, what is happening? Right now, the 731 military personnel of the mission, they're all paid by the European Union. And that's been going on for over 5 years, so it's a very important effort. Right now, it represents $250 to $350 million per year for the European Union, and they've been doing it for 5 or 6 years now. All of the logistics is provided by the United Nations, which is also doing a huge effort in addition to its effort, UNISOM, which is present on the ground with us. It's true that at the bilateral level, there are a number of important partners: the United States, the UK, Italy, other powers that are maybe less important, Turkey, India, France, China, all those countries, all of them contribute. But there's a little bit something else that we need, and that is really required, and because without this one, we can't reach that objective. And that's true both for the mission and for the national Somali forces. Ambassador Kay mentioned it. For national Somali forces, it's only a question of being paid, of being able to pay the army and the police forces, because without that, it's impossible. A food ration for those who fight, get some medical support when somebody is injured in a fight. We need to be able to intervene. We need gasoline also for cars for the military personnel. And I think that we have made an assessment, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it with the Security Council, but we will talk about that also with other partners. We will have a meeting on UNDIN that will be on Monday, September 16th in Brussels, and we hope that all of the issues will be covered and that some solution will be put together. And as I said, hope is right there. It's on the horizon. We just need that little extra step now in Somalia to reach our horizon. And the international community has been so mobilized, has done so much, that it would be really a pity that we would fall back at this point. I must say that I'm pleasantly surprised by the enthusiasm that I see in this room when I see all the people that are present here. There's obviously an interest for Somali, and Somalia, based on its geographical situation, deserves it. And in the event, I'm ready to listen to you, to answer your questions. And once again, I want to thank again the IPI and all the participants. Thank you.
Much. First of all, it's absolutely wonderful to have the two of you here expressing optimism for the future of Somalia.
Vous avez parlé de la classe politique en Somalie. Vos commentaires, en effet, sont imprimés ici devant moi, donc je lis. Vous parlez de la responsabilité que les Somaliens se réconcilient. Vous expliquez comment le fédéralisme doit marcher dans la pratique. Je ne sais pas si vous avez utilisé ces mots exactement.
Here. But it seems to me the issue can be phrased a little differently as a tension between a perception of Somalia as a centralized state and perception of Somalia as a federal state system. And the central state has been the format of Somalia from its beginning in 19 61, Siad Barre and so on, ran a central state. And that's in part why Somaliland, as soon as it could, declared independence. So I think it'd be very useful if both of you or either of you could clarify where matters stand in the Somali political class. You know, is really everybody on board the idea of a federal system and it's only a matter of working out the details? Or is there a very fundamental tension between proponents of a central state, which means keeping control in Mogadishu and not sharing power with the clans in the north and the south? I'm just trying to make this as clear as I can to all of you. So where does that, if you could clarify your expectations, because you're calling on the international community to give lots of resources here, on top of the resources, as you just said, that have already been allocated. So what are the prospects that the Somalis can bring themselves to an agreement on the fundamental structure of the state in the next 2 or 3 years? So I'd like to invite a couple of other questions here. We have about 40 minutes here, if some of you, or even a brief comment as you suggested. So the floor is open here to all of you. And if you could identify yourself, and I think there's a microphone coming to you. Or the lady in the back there. And we'll take 1 or 2 more if that's okay.
Hi. Is this on?
Speak up.
Hi, my name is Eugenia Zorbas. I work for the Department of Political Affairs. I just wanted to hear both of you speak to us a little bit more about this New Deal compact and the important meeting you were alluding to on Monday. Now, presumably, the New Deal compact has agreed a set of priorities that the Somali authorities have consulted with the rest of society. Although you mentioned consultations, should probably continue. And presumably in those priorities, one could guess security and support for security forces would be high on that list. And then my follow-up question is, if that is indeed the case, what kind of mutual confidence building measures have been thought up so that international partners can feel comfortable providing that support? We know all too well some of the problems that can arise. Issues and concerns around corruption are high. But if you could also then just tell us what else is in that compact. I don't know how broadly the contents of the priorities in that compact are known. I don't happen to know what they are, and I'd be interested to know more.
Okay. Yeah, that's absolutely great. This question of corruption, if the two of you could address it, because after the previous government was pushed out, it suddenly all emerged publicly that there was huge corruption. So a lot of the money that was given, was taken away, was not well utilized. So is that really under control now, coming under control? So let's have Jeremy back there, and then we'll take one other of the lady over here. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Labbé with the International Peace Institute. Thank you very much to both of you for being here. My question is to SRSGK. On the future of humanitarian action in Somalia, as you mentioned, MSF has left recently the country. The ICRC has virtually no expatriate presence in the country, and you put it yourself, you're feeling quite alone there, or you are alone there. Yet, in last March, when the UN Security Council created UNSOM, it took the unprecedented step, as far as I know, to mingle into the structural integration of the mission, instructing that your DSRSG, that the humanitarian coordinator should also be your DSRSG, so the deputy of a political mission. So what does it say for the future of independent humanitarian action in the country? And do you see any steps that can be taken in order to alleviate maybe some of the negative aspects of integration on humanitarian action? Thank you.
And the lady over here, please, and then we'll go back to the panel, and then we'll have another round. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Evelyn Roymans, working with Oxfam. We are actually present in Mogadishu and in South Central and in many other parts of the countries. for those who think that there are no humanitarian agencies left. Can I have two questions, one to Mr. Kay and one to Mr. Annadif? Mr. Kay, we know you're very much seized on the problem of remittances. Could you elaborate a bit on that one, and also perhaps let us know what you think should be done on this problem? Monsieur Annadif, si vous permettez,
Mr. Annadif. As soon as I speak French, nothing works. Because the issue is more related to emission. Therefore, I would like to ask you the question, and it's about sexual violence. Are you talking, including with AMISOM, which was targeted by accusations recently about the Sexual Violence Act, and also are you in talks with the Somali government on the behavior of those forces, who, one, are committing a large number of those crimes, and number two, are not very good responding to women who are claiming to have been abused, and so what are the measures that are being taken in that direction?
Great, thank you. Yes, let's have a quick go at some of those. Federalism, and is there a sort of genuine commitment to federalism? How do the sort of political sides stack up? My sense, and it's only after sort of a few months there, is that there is a genuine and fairly high level of consensus that the result of the last 22 years of conflict has been that power, control of resources, control of revenue has fragmented and dispersed geographically and to some extent along clan lines in a way that makes it very difficult to turn the clock back to 1991 or 1961 and a strong centralist state. The political realities have changed on the ground. It's more complicated, and that was, I think, why the Somali partners who drew up the provisional federal constitution came to the conclusion that we can't turn the clock back to be a strong centralist state. There are different bits of the country with different bits of power. We're going to have to make it a federal state, and federal was sort of shorthand for some kind of new political distribution, dispensation, but we don't know exactly how it will work. And I think on the whole, that is the consensus. President Hassan Sheikh, before he was president, when he was leader of a political movement, it's true, he had some reservations about the provisional federal constitution. Since becoming president, many conversations with him, and he is consistent, and I credit what he says. He absolutely knows you're not going to turn the clock back and have a unitary centralist state. It has to be a federal model. His concern is that it should be done in a way which doesn't lead to further fragmentation, balkanization, and further conflict. So it has to be handled in the right way. And that has been his concern throughout with the Jubaland agreement as well, that you could not write out from the script the role of the federal government. He was very determined and concerned, so that, for example, the port of Kismayo should be recognized as a federal asset. Even if the revenue from it would be spent within the Jubaland region, it should in principle be a federal asset. Immigration officers there should be federal immigration officers. So the central, federal government should have a presence and should have a role. So I think, on the whole, there is a consensus that it has to be federal, but what exact model of federalism is very much for debate and discussion. The New Deal question there, the New Deal is based on the sort of Busan principles, and it is very comprehensive. It's got the 5 peace building and state building goals, which run from inclusive politics, through justice, through security, through economic recovery, through services and taxation. Those are the 5 headings. And to keep things simple, which was certainly one of the intents of this, the participants in this particular game were limited to 3 priorities under each PSGs, apart from our security colleagues who managed to persuade to have 4 priorities. But every other has three priorities identified by the government and in consultation with partners and other stakeholders. And under those 3 priorities, then there is another level of detail, a bit more about plans for delivery, milestones, etc. It's pretty comprehensive and pretty useful stuff. Some of it is not new either. These, unfortunately, Somalia has had many strategies and plans over the last while or so, and this is, a compendium of some of the previous ones. But what it is linked to is also now a agreement on the funding and donor architecture to support this, and there will be a high-level partnership forum chaired by the president, and then under that a whole architecture of a steering committee, all Somali-led, but where donors and key partners will have a role as well, and funded through a couple of multi-partner trust funds, one on the UN side, one on the World Bank side, and with windows through that for other funding mechanisms. Moving towards all of that funding being eventually on Treasury, but from the start on budget, so the government will have visibility of what partners are doing and a degree of mutual accountability as well. So it's quite important. After the Brussels conference on Monday, we will genuinely be able to say, there is a plan, and there are priorities, and there are the ways and means for delivering it, and that this has both Somali ownership and leadership, but wide consensus international support as well. In terms of the fiscal side and the fiduciary risk, etc., there's a very good, I think, move by Norway to take a bit of risk on that side, and that part of under the New Deal sort of architecture, they've set up a special financing facility, $30 million in it to start with, which is on budget and on Treasury, and that the federal government is now able to use to pay civil servants' salaries. The first salaries were paid 2 weeks ago, 450 civil servants on a biometric payroll system through the central bank, which is the beginnings of a recognizable public financial management system, which is very good. But otherwise, corruption, is a work in progress. I mean, the corruption has been a major feature in Somalia over many years. It's not going to be eliminated immediately. The government, I think, in my general sort of appreciation of them, is committed at the highest levels to addressing it. But it is still a feature there, which a national anti-corruption commission, I think, would sort of certainly help to address, and it's part of the work which we're doing with UNDP and others on some of the governance issues. Integrated mission, you're right, very much. This is an integrated mission. I forgot to mention it. I suppose possibly because for me, it doesn't feel that controversial, and also possibly because actually it isn't integrated until the 1st of January 2014, so we're in the process of moving towards that. I totally recognize, the absolute issue of humanitarian space, and that there are tensions that come with being an integrated mission, tensions and risks. I mean, these are not necessarily issues that I'm unfamiliar with from previous incarnations of heading UK missions in various countries, where our development and DFID interests and the political interests of the Foreign Office are not always necessarily in the same place. And these will be managed through, I think, a high degree of respect for each other's expertise and for each other's independent remits, a high degree of focus on effects, and achieving effects are what are important and not necessarily the process. And in the Somali context as well, unfortunately, it has been now some time since the humanitarian community enjoyed any kind of sort of immunity from al-Shabaab as well, or indeed any sort of real access to al-Shabaab controlled areas too. So in the short term, there isn't such an exaggerated sort of risk of a backlash, if you like, and a reduction of access for humanitarians. But these are issues which, we will continue to work through. I think on the whole, although you said, I think this was an unusual, unique thing, my understanding was it was unusual and unique for a mission these days not to be integrated. This is actually UNSOM, if you like, catching up with the rest of the UN system. Certainly, several years ago in DRC, when I was UK ambassador there and working very closely with what was MONUC then, it was an integrated mission, and that's many, many, many years ago now. Remittances, very important issue. And Oxfam is indeed present, and many NGOs are present, international NGOs, and often using a very, very dedicated and brave national staff who've been there throughout the difficult time. And I'm very conscious the UN, to some extent, certainly as a political mission, has newly arrived relatively. I mean, we've had a fairly comfortable time in Nairobi for a little while. That is over. I have no house in Nairobi. I live in Mogadishu. This is a new start in that. Remittances, yes. I mean, the issue there is that Barclays Bank is going to have to close down. It considers it's going to have to close down the account of one of the largest money transfer agencies, Dahab Shil, which provides transfers from the diaspora, remittances, for a vast number, and I can't remember the numbers at the moment, but it's certainly the remittances add up far more to overseas development assistance for Somalia, so it's a significant thing. If they close down the Dahab Shil account, then the means whereby Somalis will remit money is not obvious, and that is a concern, and we've raised that concern, fairly consistently, along with many other people, that, this is clearly a commercial decision and a legal decision for Barclays Bank. Nobody contests that, but it's our duty to flag up the potential negative impact and effect that would have, and therefore urge, if at all possible, for some other solution to be found. Let me pass the baton.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Just one addition, just one thing that I would like to add to the issue of federalism. I do believe, and I said so, the provisional current constitution was actually the result of a large consensus, which gathered all the regions of the country, and that's an important factor because it brings that it has some legitimacy. Maybe at the level of the debate before that constitution was adopted, such party or such party expressed some reservation. But today we have a consensus. Why are we experiencing some difficulties? Because I said there's a trust crisis, and without trust, of course, it's difficult to build a state in which we can all live together. It's only natural because after more than 20 years of war and of tearing ourselves apart, the determination for each person to find themselves in a safe place is big, and of course there are a lot of concerns at the same time. The potentialities and dangers at the level of Portland are concerns, and the last events in Kismaya mean that even at the central level there's a certain crispation and certain reluctance to act. But it's this trust to live together that we must re-establish, and that is why at the level of the African Union we say that the case of Somalia is not unique. A lot of African countries have gone through wars before, and in the African Union Charter we say very clearly intangibility of borders inherited from colonization. That is why today, even though Somalia is moving forward slowly, up until now, no African country has, recognized it, and we hope that this trust is going to be reestablished, and that the same trust that explains that Somaliland was voluntarily won, so that we can, with the rest of Somalia, create a united state. We hope that this philosophy will prevail. And that's why I say that Somalia is like a child that you try to help learn how to walk, and the international community can help Somalia just to say, well, there's a big step here. Federalism, it works in many different countries throughout the world. I tell them all the time that in the case of Cameroon, for example, they started by the option of federalism. Before to do that, they had a united country. Others did the opposite. So I think at that level there's a consensus right now, but we need to strengthen that consensus, and we need to see mutual trust. And I'm sure that the examples of the agreement that has been signed between Jubala and the federal government are encouraging signs that moves us into the right direction. Last question regarding rape accusations or rape allegations about a rape that happened recently. We, at the level of the mission, we are very watchful about these kind of things. We say that we are in favor of zero tolerance policy. And for a while, we have set up a commission, a permanent commission, which has a number of alert mechanisms. And each time there's something like that, it tries to investigate it in order to see what happened, what's behind it, what is true, what is not true in the story. And we also have a number of committees at the level of each group, so that we are better alerted when there's a problem, so that we can keep a better eye on this situation. The last case that was talked about, we've put together a joint committee between the Somali government and the mission, because we were talking about soldiers from the mission and also soldiers from the Somali government that were accused. So we investigated, we interviewed people, but the facts were not proved. Were not proven, because all the people who made statements could not even demonstrate, who couldn't even show which woman was the victim of this rape. They couldn't have it. So, and I think that the government right now has a conclusion of this investigation, and the mission has also the conclusion of this investigation. And we say very simply that it just reminds us that we must be very careful, very watchful. We must not give up. And right now, the mission has started an awareness campaign through the radio, through the TV in the country. We use ads. We do a lot of work in this area. We publish kits that we distribute, and each soldier gets a kit. As soon as they arrive at the airport, they receive a little booklet that is in English, in French, and in Somali, that explains the Somali traditions to those soldiers, that explain the sensibilities in the area of rapes, in the area of sexual violence. Everybody gets a copy, and we still push and we still work on it, so that this issue, which for us is critical, is treated in the most transparent way, and so that there's no tolerance whatsoever for this kind of crimes. Maybe in the past we were a little bit at the beginning we were there. There were not that many mechanisms to fight against that. But today, impunity is unacceptable, and we can fight against impunity, and no crime should be forgotten. That's our commitment, and there are a lot of measures and initiatives that have been taken so that we don't hear once again of another sexual abuse or about a rape in Somalia. Thank you very much.
All received here. So let's take one more round. We've got about 20 minutes here. So the gentleman in the back, and the gentleman here, and the lady here. That'll be 3, and then we'll see where we are.
Ambassador of Somalia.
And the ambassador. Ambassador, how are you? Welcome. Yes, you definitely. So could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Bart Paans from the European Union delegation here in
You
New
got to
York.
speak up.
Bart Paans from the European Union delegation here in New York. I have a quick question about peacekeeping. The Security Council alluded to a peacekeeping horizon in Somalia some time back, and there's currently an EU-UN mission in the area to look at also that. But what we hear now very much is the narrative of strengthening AMISOM. As you know, the European Union is a strong partner of AMISOM, financing the wages of the soldiers. But we were very interested, of course, to know what is left of the peacekeeping horizon, medium term and long term, if this is a feasible option still, and whether a reheading is to be considered. So in short, whether this peacekeeping horizon is actually a horizon or a fata morgana.
Thank you very much. You know, the rehatting means turning this into a UN mission, ending AMISOM. So let's have the ambassador of Somalia ask his or make his comment first, and then we'll come back to you here. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. My name is Douale, Elmi Douale, Ambassador of Somalia. And that is my deputy representative, Mr. Eid Badal Mohammed. So we are fully represented here because we are the only 2 members
You're it.
with the mission. So, first of all, let me thank and commend the real briefing made by Ambassadors Annadif and Kay, and also commend Mr. Hirsch and the IPI, because I'm always interested in IPI convening these meetings, which is an eye-opener and where everybody can participate without a UN entry permit. So I think, and it has been very enlightening. I have been in Somalia lately in June during Ramadan, during the Ramadan, and I have seen what AMISOM has done and what the UN have done, and I know that when it comes to peacekeeping, Somalia had also experience in 2000, in 1992, 93, 94, 95. But now the AMISOM has proven, because of the different mandate, they have proven that they have done a good job. Now, of course, the UN now can come in, because the problem was, if there is no peace, how you could keep peace. So now we hope the peace will be there, and then of course the peacekeepers will be coming. Now, I'm sorry I missed Mr. Kay's, Ambassador Kay's presentation, but I have attended the AU mission meeting with Annadif, was briefing us. And the only thing I can say is that, first of all, Mr. Hirsch, it's very important to know if Somalis now are ready for a federal system of governance instead of a centralized system of governance. Somalia, since July 1960, when the Union of Somaliland and Somalia happened, it was a republic. Then the military took over in October 1968, and since when it became a military dictatorship. And people have seen that centralized system of government cannot work in Somalia, because Somalia, fortunately or unfortunately, people are very much independent. Most of them are nomadic. Most of them do not recognize one central government to govern them. So the destruction came. And because there was no system to unite them, this has happened. But now the federal system is taking bit by bit, and everybody agrees now. You know, we have been taking a lot of steps since 2012, 11, and so on. And I know we will succeed. I can tell you that, for example, my deputy here is from one region, I am from another region. Yet now we know that if we can have the regional type of managing our own business locally, we accept the federal government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Please.
Good afternoon. James Staples from the UN Syria Planning Team. Notwithstanding the deepening engagement with the political elite and bearing in mind the legacy of previous UN engagement, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the credibility and perception of the UN at the community level and the potential for both positive and negative feedback between the two different entities on stage. Both the UN mission and also AMISOM, both where they can be positively reinforcing or negatively reinforcing.
Last question, Madame here. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Judy Cheng Hopkins. I'm the head of the Peace Building Office here in the UN. Thank you so much for your great presentations. A question on Al-Shabaab. Considering that Al-Shabaab still controls over 50%, I believe 40-50% of the land, at least South Central, and is not abating, apparently. We had a conversation earlier. It's not abating. How would one go about the Al-Shabaab menace and problem? I think, Ambassador Kay, you had mentioned earlier that obviously we have to deal with this militarily as well as politically. Okay, militarily is clear. We don't have to go into that. But politically, how would you go about dealing with Al-Shabaab politically? Thank you.
Just to add to that, because both of you talked about building up the Somali army. Of course, Hillary Clinton met with Sheikh Sharif over 2 years ago with the same discussion. So, I mean, in 2013, 2014, I mean, is the Somali army going to be a player in this security issue, or is this really AMISOM and/or if it's re-hatted, the UN? So if you could clarify all of that, that would just be excellent. So please, here's the wrap-up comments.
Okay, good. Well, thank you again for your good questions. Benchmarking exercise we were asked about, this is the AU-UN joint review of AMISOM with a view to, well, as mandated by the Security Council, to look at potential re-hatting, potential peacekeeping operation. That review is still happening. They were out on the ground in the last couple of weeks in Mogadishu and in the region. They haven't yet produced their final recommendations. My general sense, and certainly my personal sort of input to it, is that for a traditional UN peacekeeping operations, the conditions on the ground are not right and are unlikely to be right, probably unless and until 2016 elections is the kind of sort of time frame that feels instinctively to me to be the time horizon. But I think the review has done a good job. It's been a great AU-UN joint effort, and I suspect and hope that they will produce a set of recommendations which will be built around, if you like, a campaign plan that will set out what they consider the most credible timelines according to resources available and conditions. On the EU side as well, I mean, the EU has done clearly an an enormous job in terms of funding AMISOM stipends, and that is something which we're obviously very keen to see continue, and we're also deeply conscious of the fact that the EU has been bearing more of the burden on that than others. So the call would be definitely for others to contribute as well, particularly to achieve an enhancement in AMISOM. But there is burden sharing happening. I mean, the other member states, US, Turkey, Japan, are all funding various bits of stipends and salaries in the security forces, security sector. So the EU doing a good job, but it isn't actually only the EU. The EU is also doing a good job on, it answers a bit to your question, John, about the Somali National Security Forces. The EU training mission has now trained 3,000 Somali National Security Forces outside in Uganda who have returned, the 5th and 6th Brigades. And I'm told by the EU about 80% of the people they've trained are identifiable still in their defined units, which is not a bad sort of retention rate. So now the EU are going to shift to doing that training inside Mogadishu, which again is a sign of the progress on the ground. So though Hillary Clinton may have had the conversation a few years ago, I think things have moved on a bit, but we haven't yet, as I said at the beginning, achieved really critical mass or momentum on that, and particularly the equipping of these troops and their support in the field, the logistics support is lacking. What's more? Popular perception of the UN. We do, I mean, and of AMISOM. I mean, it's one thing, we actually have a joint strategic information team that's shared between AMISOM and UN, does some polling, quite good polling across the country, as much as it can do. On the whole, the levels of consent and are reasonably high, and I think that's again another ground for optimism. And I've been in countries where there is a far more nuanced, if not completely antipathetic, view and approach to the UN presence. On the whole, in Somalia, it's well perceived. Now, that window of opportunity and of consent and goodwill isn't going to last forever, so it's incumbent upon us to actually deliver and show that we are helping the federal government to really transform the lives of people. Otherwise, we'll lose it. But there is, amidst all the challenges and all the difficulties, I mean, there are clearly some bits of good news which shine through. I mean, this last week, the federal government has launched a Go to School program, which is aimed at enrolling 1 million children in primary school. It started off with 100,000 registered last Sunday, sponsored by UNICEF, but led and centre stage by the federal government in 9 regions. Despite the al-Shabaab control and difficulties, it's happening in 9 regions across Somalia. And this is the first time in 22 years the government has opened a single school. So, there are bits that are sort of encouraging and showing that we can start to put a better future in place. Campaign against al-Shabaab. Yeah, I mean, my view is the campaign should be three-dimensional, a 3D campaign I always talk about. It should be military, political, and practical. And the military side is, I think, essential, and it shouldn't be at all neglected, and I think we do need to do more in order to actually make the necessary advances on that. The political side is a combination, really, of sort of central and local. And I think for the central, there's, 2 parts to that. One is a willingness for a degree of sort of key leader engagement and possible reconciliation, deal striking, etc. Some of the al-Shabaab leaders have been sort of inveterate negotiators or teasers, maybe, sort of sending out signals that they want to reconcile, etc., etc. One of them, Hassan Dahi Awais, was inveterate at that. Eventually, he ran out of options. He was cast out, split from his leadership of al-Shabaab, had to flee, and by the time he gave himself up into custody, he was still negotiating, and he still continues negotiating today. But his negotiating position is a lot less strong than it was because he's in the custody of the National Security Agency. But nevertheless, it's an important point. How his case is handled is really a genuine dilemma because there is a clear competing case for justice to be done. A man who's alleged to be responsible for very serious crimes, plus. On the other side, if you handle it well, with certain degree of reconciliation, possibly sort of a comfortable suspended sentence or something, would that incentivize and motivate other senior al-Shabaab to reconcile? It's a real dilemma. The government is wrestling with that, and it's not an easy one. But so there is that. And the second element from the centre is actually potentially, and again, there's discussions sort of underway, just beginning to think through the role of an amnesty law for a more sort of general sort of approach to the rank and file foot soldiers of al-Shabaab, who only number sort of 5,000. On the practical dimension of the campaign, it's much more about two things again. One is a practical disengaged combatants program, which would be a DDR leading to sort of alternative livelihoods. Again, the number's not enormous if you've only got 5,000 estimated sort of al-Shabaab. We've all done DDR programs for far, far more than that. But there's also a second practical side, which is the delivery of immediate sort of stabilization effect in liberated areas so that people feel the benefit of better security, better services in a quicker way, which can help too. So, as I say, 3D campaign, and I think we're collectively all beginning to sort of coalesce around those directions. So I remain, optimistic, and all of this. Somebody, I can't remember whether it was actually in this meeting or another one earlier. I mean, the point we all know from our experiences collectively working in conflict-affected countries, and I've had the honor, privilege to work in Afghanistan, DRC, Sudan, and now Somalia. I mean, is that these things always cost more and take longer than anybody expects or anybody wants. But it can be done as well. And if we look across Liberia, Sierra Leone, countries that have experienced horrendous civil wars and anarchy and complete failure, eventually, and it is eventually, usually, I mean, the academics will say it will take as long as the conflict lasted, that period again, in order to assure sort of really sustainable stability. So we have to be realistic about it. It's not easy, but we will have to also remain pretty optimistic that it can be done. And the UN collectively, the international community collectively, have done this before. We've shown it's possible. And I think now we have a unique opportunity in Somalia to actually demonstrate again that transformational effect that we can achieve. Thank you.
Grazie.
I don't have much to add, actually. Just in relation to the question that was asked by Madam here about the military solution and the political solution. I think that any war always ends by negotiation, and we need to think that this is a cornerstone of our thinking here, even though it's difficult. And you can only negotiate with your enemies. it's true that in Somalia, up until now, I don't think that there has been anything rather sophisticated in terms of a serious political discussion with maybe some parties that are ready to stop fighting. What are we going to do, especially in terms of the leaders? There are people who are under, international warrants from the international community. Some people are on the list of the Security Council of the United Nations, and they want to arrest them. That brings a number of issues, and the government should be helped to find issues to this problem. I mentioned the example of Mali many times because in Mali, the people were almost like Al-Shabaab before. Afterwards, there were a number of people who made statements saying that they renounce that ideology and that they are ready now to negotiate. That's how you got the Ouagadougou agreement. There was a negotiation, people signed, and so on. So if someone renounces his jihadist or extremist ideology and is ready to recognize the central power authorities, and that it might even be ready to be brought to justice. I think that's part of the reconciliation, to accept to be brought to justice. I think that this door needs to be open if it's there's an opening for ordinary fighters. Is already Mali. There's a program. Maybe it's not good enough, but the door must be open. The door is open for all deserters and so on and so forth. They can all come in and be brought to justice with mercy. At the level of Al-Shabaab and especially those, we need a rather elaborate political mechanism to think about the different criteria. What should be done? Because the example that was mentioned by Ambassador K earlier is a typical case. How can we solve this kind of typical case? And in any event, I believe that now is the time also to ask these kind of questions. Now is the time to bring coherent answers so that we can even be only just credible for the people we're fighting, for Al-Shabaab people, because you never have a purely military solution. And that is true also in Somalia, and we are also collaborating, once again, we will repeat it, with our friends from UNSOM, so that together we can manage to elaborate some idea that can support the effort of the government, of the federal government, and that might help also the international government help us. Thank you very much.
Discussion. I want to thank, first of all of you for coming. I want to thank all of you who have asked questions, very trenchant questions. I particularly would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Mr. Kay, and Ambassador Annadif. You've been very candid, and I also really appreciate the optimism. I think everybody here, Ambassador, would like to see much better Somalia in the future. So again, my thanks on behalf of everybody in this room, to both of you.
Thank you.